want to welcome everybody today to our, actually this is our second AI Bowl. And so this is the Third Coast Augmented Intelligence Bowl. I'm Abel. I'm a professor of medicine here at Northwestern University and director of the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine. I'm joined today by my co-host, Ngan MacDonald. Ngan, you want to say a few words there?
I'm Ngan MacDonald, and I am Chief of Data Operations. This is our second time doing this, and we feel like maybe we have a little bit more experience with this, but then we also ask you to excuse us if we run into any technical difficulties, because it is our second time.
It's always a little harder remotely because there's a lot of moving parts, but bear with us. And so again, I want to thank everybody for the work that you did leading up to this. I especially want to thank all the folks who behind the scenes made this possible, including our sponsors, which we'll have a chance to acknowledge in a little bit too. Just want to give you a quick outline of what the day looks like today. So, after this welcome, we're really excited to have Blair Hirst, who will give our keynote right after this introduction. We will have a chance for a little break afterwards, but we'd love for people to stay around, ask questions, and then we'll go into team presentations. And so today we have 7 teams that will be each doing their presentations. The goal is each one will have about 20 minutes. One second, about 20 minutes. And so that'll be typically in the 10 to 15 minute range for the presentation, with the rest of the time for questions, mostly communicated for our judges. We'll have another break for lunch around 12:20, and then we'll pick back up again. And then we'll plan to finish up around 2:30. So next slide. Just want to give a little bit of background about the Institute. So the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine was founded in 2020, literally a week or two before the pandemic shut the whole world down. And so it has been an uphill climb, but I'm really pleased to say that we've made a lot of progress. The mission of the Institute is to bridge computational methods with human expertise to advance medical science and improve human health. And a lot of the thinking behind this is that we're very much geared towards how we can augment and improve the current practice of medicine and make life better and easier for the providers and the patients that together we serve. We have 6 centers. We actually are about to announce a 7th center shortly, but we have a diversity of leadership and a diversity of topics that we cover. One of the things that we've been really sort of centered around is, obviously there's a lot of concerns people have about intelligence and ethical issues. So bioethics still serves as a foundation for a lot of the work we do. Then we have, again, centers focused on deep phenotyping and precision therapeutics, molecular analysis, education, and I'm happy to say that on the education front, we're one of the first medical schools to have a curriculum that introduces data science and digital health in year 1 and carries it forward throughout the whole sort of spectrum. So, that's been really a fun journey. Still works in progress, but again, we're excited about where that will lead and what future that sort of provides for. We have a center around computational imaging, given how important imaging is around a lot of the artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence applications. And we also have a more traditional biomedical informatics and data science center. Each of these, again, is led by, I didn't put the right pictures here, but leaders in their own right. This is a quick plug. If anybody is interested, we are certainly hiring too. So if people are interested in faculty positions, and we also have training positions, and we're open and looking for applicants. So, okay, yeah, I was just looking at the notes there. So I do want to also take a little bit of time to acknowledge our sponsors, without which none of this would be possible. We're excited. A number of these are repeat. So Vizient in particular has been an outstanding sort of sponsor and from day one. So we had this event last year, and they've really pleased and thankful that they've provided sponsorship for this again this year. Highmark Health, again, a new sponsor and somebody who, again, we've had a long-standing relationship with, and and see the value in sort of promoting novel work coming from our next generation. Leap of Faith Technologies, the chair of that is somebody who's been on our external advisory board for many years, Frank Nami-Rad, himself a pioneer in the informatics field, and again has really shared with us a vision of how do we help train the next generation of leaders, and also has been a big supporter of our efforts to anchor technology and expertise here in the Midwest. So we do have a little bit of a Midwestern, I guess, twang to the work we're doing, and we're trying to promote certainly people and institutions here in the Midwest. And then the American Medical Association, which also has served on our external advisory committee, and has provided not just sort of their expertise and network, but also through this some financial sponsorship as well. So thanks again to all our sponsors who make this all possible. So I'm really excited to hear today from Blair Hirst. Blair Hirst is a visionary, I would say, who's had an extensive background within the startup and innovation space. Blair will tell us more about their work. As one of the key highlights, I would say, is that Blair is CEO and founder of the Digital Health Review. I had a chance to go through that website. It's exciting to see, and it's a great idea. I think oftentimes we just don't know sort of what are reputable tools that you might use, apps that might be available to consumers, and Digital Health Review provides that. It provides a safe place to go and identify what might be useful tools in this really diverse marketplace. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blair. I think Blair may have some additional some background, and really excited, and thank you, Blair, for agreeing, and we look forward to hearing your talk. And one second, we may have to unmute.
One second.
There we go. I was on mute. Full ball on my part.
Okay.
Blair, are you sharing? Sharing just because.
Either way, I can share my screen if it's easier.
Why are you not?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you, Blair.
I was just saying earlier, thank you guys for that very warm welcome. I am recovering from a cold, so I don't sound like this every day. And if you cannot understand me, just feel free to let me know. There we go. Is everyone able to see this? Yes.
You can see it.
Okay, great. Sorry, I can't see anyone here. Thank you all for joining here. I am going to talk to you guys a little bit about digital health equity and how we can build health innovations that can change the world, not for some, but ideally for all. So one of my favorite quotes from a leader that we're probably all familiar with, Martin Luther King Jr., is, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane. And this quote is very impactful for me because as I think about how we as humans interact on this earth and with each other, as we extract just the very simple Maslow hierarchy of needs, that of health is a very basic need, and good healthcare is a right and a need of all. And so when we see inequities within our health system, we must bring light to it, we must call it what it is, and then seek justice in it. So again, my name is Blair Hirst. I am the founder of Digital Health Review. Originally, my training is as a biomedical engineer. I got my undergraduate training in there, as well as a master's in innovation and technology management. And I spent the majority of my career building products, both in large institutions and in startups for patients and for providers. And this ranged from a host of software products to hardware products. And what I came to love and understand was the potentiality and the impact that technology can have at scale. But what I also came to experience was that oftentimes, as digital health solutions were being developed and deployed, they were really truly missing the mark. They were not getting as much engagement as they possibly could. Patients were unsure about whether or not they could trust them. And there just seemed to be a lack of vitality in forward moving, and something that I thought could be a very impactful thing at scale. And so that's when I began my journey into figuring out how can we systematically and with true thought thinking about building digital health products for those that need it the most, those who may not have access to it. So that's one part of my story as to why I got into digital health equity. The other part is fairly personal. So I'm originally from Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana specifically. And Louisiana as a state has one of the lowest healthcare systems in the country. And my oldest sister, Shalana, from birth was diagnosed with sickle cell anemia, which to many is a very invisible disease. It's when the red blood cells of your body are not formed properly, mostly in sort of sickled or altered shapes. They often get stuck in blood vessels and areas causing internal pain, organ damage, and oftentimes early death. Most people with sickle cell die about 30 years earlier than an average individual. And throughout my life and throughout her life, as I was seeing her go through the healthcare system in and out of hospitals, being gaslit about her symptoms because they weren't visible all the time, being gaslit about her self-advocacy, telling providers what kind of care she needed, what kind of drugs that she was allergic to, and them still not listening. It became very apparent that, unfortunately, the healthcare system is not built for all. And it became even more apparent to me as a child when my mother transitioned us into healthcare migrants. We moved from Louisiana to Maryland so that my sister could attend and start getting treatment at Johns Hopkins University in their healthcare center because the healthcare was just better. And thinking about that journey for my sister and seeing it myself really is sort of the second reason as to why I started being invested in digital health equity and trying to make sure that others that are in similar positions have an easier time, especially as someone who is building technology and working with large institutions as well as innovators in the space. So that's really why I got started. And when it comes to digital health, there are plenty of opportunities to create impact and value with tech in the healthcare system. There are lots of issues and gaps currently that we know of. Here are a few: Black mother mortality rates, Asian colon cancer risk, nursing home care deficits, the lack of treatment options and awareness around women's menopause, access to medications, men's health, physician burnout, addiction and recovery. The list goes on. So we all are and should be aware of all the discrepancies that are happening in healthcare and thinking about them. There are several ways that we can apply technology or tech-enabled services to help smooth out the transition. But when we think of them, much like my own story, much like my sister's story, there are also typical restraints to getting access to healthcare. Usually this is around high costs or lack of insurance or time constraints, but most of the constraints are tied directly to social determinants of health. And so when I think of digital health, I closely and in turn think of public health and how it affects folks, not just in a point in time when they're in a hospital system or in a clinic, but their whole selves, what they're eating, where they live, how they're able to get to healthcare centers, how much money they have in their pocket, what is the community around them that's supporting them. All the social determinants of health that impact someone that is outside of the healthcare system. These things should be considered. And the beauty of technology is that if we consider these things while we build digital health solutions, we are now placing ourselves in a position where technology can transform how, when, and where healthcare is delivered. we're really at a time in the ecosystem and in healthcare delivery of transformation. And what I hope is that we as innovators become very intentional about how we're building. And what I mean by intention is that as we're building, we have to be very cognizant that we're not taking existing barriers to care and amplifying them through technology. From my experience in my career, from my family experience, what I've learned has come down to sort of three main pillars of some of the barriers that exist in the healthcare ecosystem and some of the things that we should be aware of as we build. The first one is just simply systems. So the structure of institutions that have existed both historically and in the future have embedded exclusionary practices. The fact that most people receive health insurance if they have a job or from their employer, while that's great, is an exclusionary practice, especially for those that may not have a large employer that can afford a great healthcare insurance, those that may work for themselves, those that may not have a job. We have to think about how healthcare is built currently, how the system and infrastructure of it's built, and who it's leaving out. And then secondly, is sort of the people that are involved in that ecosystem. There are personal biases in myself and the doctors that are treating patients and the patients themselves. We all need to be cognizant of that and be honest about it and bring it to the forefront in our care. A lack of representation of who is at the table when we're building digital health solution, who was consulted around the building of those digital health digital health is part of representation as well. And that level of voice is needed so that we can ask key questions and help prevent some of the existing barriers that are there. All of this is going to layer into how we're building trust in healthcare, which we all know is missing in huge amounts, in particular communities and across the healthcare ecosystem as a whole. So if we can understand how people are coming to the table in healthcare delivery, we can help solve for some of the personal bias, representation, lack of communication, and trust issues. And then lastly, one of my favorite stats is that knowledge or health literacy is something that we truly need to solve for, not just the technology, but the education piece around healthcare. Stats are showing that health literacy or a lack of health literacy is costing the US billions and billions of dollars each year. If people don't understand what their healthcare options are, what their healthcare costs are, how they can advocate for themselves, then that is just going to trickle down into poor experiences, people not going to see doctors when they can, getting preventative care earlier, as well as advocating for themselves in healthcare settings. And so the more that we can provide health literacy to patients as well as providers and caregivers, the less likely we're going to continue to bring in some of the barriers of access to care as we build out technological solutions. A prime example of how tech can amplify health disparities was actually recently discussed in a science journal and then reevaluated in a Nature journal. So millions of Black people were affected by racial bias in healthcare algorithms. So hospital systems and insurance or payers use algorithms to, as we should know here, better understand what the patient population is, and ideally create care efficiencies in hospital settings or clinic settings. And what researchers dug into in a particular algorithm was that the algorithm itself was based on hospital and insurer incentives. How can we reduce costs? So they were ranking patients on high, medium, and low scores based on a category of how much of cost their care would be. And what they found based on this algorithm incentive was that 17% of patients assigned to care were Black. But as the researchers dug deep into the algorithm and they removed areas of bias around costs, they found that 46% of Black patients should have been assigned care. And that often the Black patients that were assigned care from the algorithm were sicker, had a higher case of comorbidities, as well as health disparities. And so when we think about building tools that have opportunities to affect millions of patients, we have to be extremely cognizant of the impact that they can instill. 200 million people were affected by this algorithm. Hospitals and payers are deploying this, and people's care are being determined on cost incentives. I would not say that that is a patient-centric approach. I do not think that who was ever involved in the building of the algorithm had necessarily this intent, but there are going to be unintended consequences in the things that we build if we are not cognizant of how we're building them, what the incentives are, who we're excluding, and who we're including in all of this. And so this was a prime example that I just wanted to bring in here to show you guys and to just amplify what the effects can be if we're not considering digital health equity as a whole. Now, the big question that we all have is, how do we build for equity? I don't actually think that there is one right answer. I don't actually think that we know fully yet. What I do know is that we understand through mountains of data, years of research, qualitative and quantitative research, stories and accountability, what has not worked in the past, what has plagued our healthcare ecosystem and caused some of the health inequities that exist. We do know the health disparities that exist and who the patient populations are that are living within them. And we do know what is happening. And so all that I think that we can do when we try to build for equity is take that understanding and translate that into the tools that we're building and into the partnerships that we're creating so that we can inch by inch, year by year, from small to big scale, make a dent in health inequity. How do we do this? Well, if we think about the 3 pillars that I talked about, systems, people, and knowledge, let's solve individually for each of them. So for solving for systems, what does that look like? My belief and my understanding is that healthcare delivery is one of the biggest innovation opportunities to solve for the next 5 years. We have been in a rut in the healthcare system and how we are bringing healthcare to people. People are going to clinics, they're going to hospitals. Of late, mostly due to COVID, telehealth has taken off, but there are still some issues there. But even still, within those 3 categories and in a few more community-based hospitals, it's usually having folks, consumers, patients, people like us, going to a care center. And I want us to think about how we can reimagine or innovate on healthcare delivery systems and models. Specifically, how can we expand healthcare systems? That means thinking about how do we develop healthcare approaches to healthcare delivery that go beyond traditional methods, that go beyond the clinic or the hospital, meeting people where they are. How do we build for all digital healthcare service experience, creating opportunities to access solutions outside of traditional channels? While some may tout that technology, and I do agree, allows for more access, allows for clinicians to speak more seamlessly together, allows for patients to get care that they wouldn't otherwise, we have to think about folks who may actually not have technology readily at their hand, who may live in hospital care deserts, who may not live in areas that have good internet service or parts internet service. How are we building our systems to solve for their digital care experiences? I've seen some models where, particularly in apps, there are offline version modes where even if you do not have internet, you're still able to access some of the care materials and suggestions. around that delivery service. And that is a way that I think is effective. But we need to continue thinking about this, continue exploring options of how we can build for all of these, for folks that may not necessarily have access to technology consistently, or may have different types of devices that are not iPhones or Android devices or computers or tablets. All of this counts. And then lastly, we have to meet patients where they are. We all know that this country is not a monolith. I can definitely tell from the folks that are here on this call that we understand that there are races and culture and ethnicities that we have to think about and account for. So when we're building these healthcare experiences, we have to build for language preferences, as well as disabilities and cultural differences. If I am building a tool to help someone that has a physical disability, am I thinking about how they're going to be able to use this tool with their hands or other body parts? Or maybe they need to have auditory assistance. Maybe that's where voice AI comes in. Am I making sure that if I'm building for indication or a disease progression that's pretty common or prominent in the Latino community, am I building in language preference and choices and making sure that there's options for them? Am I building in cultural differences for Black moms who may come in to healthcare providers and talk about their experience at home in ways that they may not, the healthcare provider may not understand, but if through proper training and through asking questions, can meet the patients where they are so that they can share and help prevent poor outcomes. All of these healthcare delivery methods matter, and they need to be solved for early on in the innovation process rather than as an afterthought. I want to highlight one particular example of innovation in healthcare delivery to bring some context here. So in Northwest Baltimore, there's a founder named Andrew Suggs who is trying to help health in the Black male population. Traditionally, the barbershop has always been a place of comfort, place of familiarity. And so thinking about healthcare delivery, Andrew decided to bring tech to the barbershop. As someone is getting their hair cut, speaking with their friends, talking about their lives, their concerns, he's able to then screen them for early prevention around healthcare issues, provide healthcare recommendations so they can get onto treatment or follow up with their doctors. This is a unique and innovative approach that's using existing tools, nothing that's too crazy or too innovative, but meeting people where they are and changing where healthcare delivery starts. And that in and of itself is innovative, and that in and of itself is going to have massive amounts of impact in a community that desperately needs it. So next, how are we solving for people and the gaps that are involved when we're dealing with and talking to people? A lot of healthcare companies, a lot of tech companies will espouse that they are patient-centric, they are patient-first. And I truly believe that is meant and heartfelt. But sometimes being patient-centric could look like building and behaving and growing in counterintuitive ways. And in order to maintain that patient centricity, we still must do it anyway. So what does that exactly mean? I truly believe that there is sometimes in the tech industry and in startups and in building, and sometimes just because we're innovators and we're nerds and we sort of like the new thing, we get caught up in the headlines of the new tech that's out there and trying to find a way to use that tech to solve issues. When instead we should be looking at the people, the patients and their problem, digging in deep with them, figuring out what they need and going from there, and then seeing what tech can help amplify the solution to their problems. So in this regard, I'm a strong believer that in order to be patient-centric, we must first fall in love with the problem that the patient is facing rather than technology. We may want to use VR. We may want to use voice AI, but when we dig into the patient, when we think about their setting, when we think about their cultural background, when we think about where they live, when we think about their transportation options, maybe the technology is not voice AI. Maybe the technology is transportation. And that brings me to another point that I constantly talk about, which is digital health equity, while it can be in healthcare, can also be in other fields. Those that are working in real estate or transportation also still have as much of an obligation to building for digital health equity or building for health equity as those who are healthcare providers or building for healthcare providers or patients, because they have an effect on someone's care. This goes back to the social determinants of health. Next, let's think about how we can go to market locally. So again, may sound counterintuitive. There's a lot of pressure to build solutions and then deploy them into large scaling providers or solutions. I built this tech, I built this app. It's great, it's wonderful. I'm going to go to employers. I'm going to go to payers. I'm going to go to large institutions that can help me get to scale quickly. And while I don't think that's necessarily bad, I think that in doing that, we're also missing opportunities to learn from and grow and build with local communities that have already proven, because they've been around for quite some time, how to think about, serve, and work with local patient populations that are most at need. So community-based launches provide an opportunity for greater impact and learning. Launching at a community hospital locally allows you to get very close to a lot of the health disparities that you may not see in large academic healthcare systems, that you may not necessarily have access to if you're deploying with an insurer, that you may not have quick and easy feedback loops with than if you're sending out your solution out or white labeling out to someone else that's going to deploy it. And there have been successes in building local and then expanding out. And then lastly, in order to be patient-centric, I think it is incredibly, incredibly important to be transparent. And what I mean by that is being transparent around costs, your consenting practices. If a patient or caregiver is using your service, what are they signing up for? If you're using algorithms, please explain what your algorithm is doing. How is it making decisions? And what part are care providers being told to use the algorithm or to use their training? Who are you going to be your business partners with? And how are patients' data going to be shared with those business partners? And what types of patient data are you collecting? All of this needs to be embedded into your mission. All of this needs to be embedded into how you want to communicate who you are as an innovator or who you are as a brand. And being transparent is one of the key ways that we are going to improve upon the trust gap that is plaguing the healthcare industry and plaguing the healthcare ecosystem. Most folks are becoming quite open to digital health solutions. And as the younger generations who have been around technology more and are more comfortable with it grow older, we have an opportunity to use that. But we can spoil that if we're not transparent and clear about our practices. And I do believe this is a minimal and low bar that we can, as innovators, think for and build for early on. One innovator that I want to talk about specifically when we're thinking about patient-centric models is founder Tony Ajaya, who is building a community-based tech-enabled platform for primary care in New York City. And Toyin started locally. She started with small community centers that paired community managers with patients to walk them through their healthcare options, to get them services they need based on not just their healthcare needs, but their life needs. If they had transportation issues, they were solving for it. If they had language barrier issues, they were solving for that as well. And City Block Health has been able to show that when you build in this way, when you build locally, when you build for the patient, when you build in a patient-centric way, there can be success. If you don't know who City Block Health is, I strongly suggest you look them up. I strongly suggest you follow her. She has great ideas and insights about how to build and scale healthcare delivery for local communities. Not just New York, she's also scaled a little bit into the Midwest as well. And then lastly, which I feel is probably one of the biggest things that's not necessarily technology focused, but provides for a very big opportunity to get folks onto technology and embedded in technology, is how are we going to be solving for knowledge? This goes back to the trust issue. What I think we can do when we're thinking about building for knowledge in a digital health and in an equitable way is that we must first build for learning engines so that we can then share our knowledge. And what do I mean by learning engines? I mean that we don't know what we don't know unless we're measuring it. We need to make sure that early on in the process of building our tools, we're building in solutions and opportunities to study our patient populations, to understand product analytics, so that we can collect data to show whatever clinical value our solution is providing, as well as collecting data at the patient population level to track impact across demographics. I have a solution that is targeting diabetes. How is this affecting Black single mothers? How is this affecting men in the Midwest? How is this affecting Black women in low income, Black women that have an upper incomes? How is this affecting those that have type 1, type 2? All these questions cannot be answered unless we're intentional about collecting data that are going to provide insights into how we are affecting the patient population that we're serving. One of my most exciting things that I think that digital health can do is reach a lot of people. I think the beauty of technology is there. I think it crosses geographical barriers in a way that healthcare hasn't seen in quite some times. But one of my biggest fear is that in doing so, we have an opportunity, for better or for worse, to impact public health at scale rapidly. And if we're not intentional about how we're measuring what our solutions are doing to local communities and to patient populations, we may not know or catch unintentional but bad outcomes until it's much too late. And I don't think that has to be the case if we're very intentional about measuring from the beginning our outcomes. The next thing is educating our audiences. So let's build for the education gap. Let's build for the health literacy gap. Providing resources and support to empower your patients and caregivers in their care choices. How can we empower folks with evidence-based research, with access to community, so that when they are looking for solutions, they feel empowered and that they're no longer passive participants in the healthcare ecosystem, but active participants in their healthcare. And we all know that word of mouth is quite strong. And so someone that feels empowered in taking care of their health is more likely to share that empowerment with their family members and with their friends, basically creating network effects of education and increasing health literacy. And then lastly, one of the things that I hope that as innovators and as a digital health community, we become really good at is learning to partner and not compete. There are opportunities to partner with academic institutions, policy, regulatory bodies, and even other digital health innovators to share the learnings that we're getting because we're measuring what we're doing and because they may have or may be building solutions that don't necessarily solve the core need of our patient population, but ancillary needs. And so 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. And so as you build, and if you do want to start companies, and if you do want to put your solutions out into the market, and as you're thinking about who else is building in similar areas, or who else is building adjacent things, don't necessarily look at them as competition necessarily. You can potentially look at them as someone to reach out to and partner with to provide better care to your patient population. And we as digital health innovators must lead in that way. One thing that I think we also need to lead in is being very cognizant in how we are differentiating ourselves through clinical validation. Rock Health, which is a venture capital firm and a research institute, provides research on digital health, particularly consumer health, and produces a lot of information and a lot of research around the clinical robustness of the digital health ecosystem. And what we're seeing to date in the last 5 years, as digital health has been taking off and building and growing and investment has been coming in, is that the amount of companies that have actually shown clinical value or that have gone through clinical robust validation through FDA filings or clinical trials or clinical research is quite a few. And so my goal here is to impart, potentially influence innovators that I speak with and that I meet with to start thinking about building for clinical value early on, through measuring what you're doing so you can show the clinical value, pivot as you need to. Because what I don't want to happen is for the digital health ecosystem to be a hype model, to be just air. And what we need to try to understand and solve for is clinical value early on. And this is really important. And I think as you begin your journey in innovating, as you begin your journey in partnering with other institutions like Northwestern and your other innovative peers, keeping this top of mind is going to make sure that the inequities of the past in healthcare are not going to be perpetuated, expanded upon, and exacerbated through digital health. They're going to be building solutions for clinical value. They're going to be providing valuable clinical care, and that we're not going to be contributing to clinical or medical waste and increasing the noise in the space. I want to leave a lot of time for questions. But the last thing that I want to say is that as innovators, we are in a unique and privileged position to help define the future. We're building the future. And so being intentional about what we do with that power is the least we can do for the lives that we're ultimately going to touch. And so I'm going to always preach, advocate for, and support that others build equitable health tech. And I am excited to see and learn about all the innovators that are here today and the journey that you're going to be going on. Thank you.
Blair, thank you so much. That was a powerful, inspiring talk, and thank you for bringing your personal experience forward, your professional expertise. That really is something that for me, I found really resonant. I particularly like I think I wrote down, fall in love with the problem patients face rather than the technology, and meeting people where they are. And I think that is such an important lesson for innovators, researchers, clinicians, and I think something that we all would do well to take to heart. So thank you for that. We do have a couple questions, and so I think we'll start with some of the judges who had a few questions, and I think Karandeep had one, and I think he's come on camera.
Yeah, thank you, Blair. Great talk. Learned a lot from it, and appreciate you putting it together and giving it. Question I had for you. So, many of the issues you brought up with healthcare algorithms at their core come from a lack of engagement or seemingly a lack of understanding of the people who will be adversely affected by the algorithms. And it seems like engaging people is central to the process of improving the current state. And it seems like that's true not just for algorithms, but also for healthcare more broadly. So I guess what are your thoughts on effective ways to engage people and to guide health systems? I know you touched on some of them, like working with community hospitals, places that are closer to the community, but what can other hospitals do? What can other, health systems do to better engage people, in decisions around what algorithms to use and how to use them?
Absolutely. And I participated in a panel discussion around this that Harvard was giving a few months back. And what I can say is that I think this is where data really comes into play, and transparency as well. So if you're looking for engagement, it's really important to understand that algorithms are only going to be as good as the data that they're training against, right? I think we all know that. And so the more data that we have, the more granular that we can get in our data collection, the better that those algorithms are going to be. Secondly, we need to be very transparent about what the algorithms are doing, what the algorithms are potentially recommending, as well as educating the providers that are using the algorithms on those things, but also making sure that they understand that an algorithm cannot replace medical training, cannot replace the care deliveries they need to understand at the bedside, that an algorithm should be used as a supplemental tool to care delivery. It should not replace the doctor, it should not replace the medical training or their decision making. And so having very good documentation around what the algorithm is doing, having very good data collection for the algorithm to train on, and then also letting patients know when algorithms are going to be a part of their care. I think over time, people are going to become more and more accustomed to it and more willing potentially to share their consumer health data if they understand that there's going to be a personal impact. And with that willingness to share, the better the data gets. It becomes a cycle. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
Great. And I think Demetra may have a question as well. Demetra, do you want to unmute?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Blair, again, what an amazing and powerful presentation. Thank you so much for that. It's an issue that we've been working a lot in a lot of the initiatives that I've been working with. The question I have for you is in a different way. Everybody recognizes that technology could be a great solution to overcome some of the disparities that exist. But the problem I see here is that there's fundamental loss of trust. Is there a way that you can imagine that technology can help us regain the trust of the people that have lost faith in the healthcare system altogether because of past injustices?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of those people, and I innovate in this space. I too am skeptical sometimes, and I think we need to be honest about that as well. You know, the first thing that came to mind in your question is that there's probably multiple ways to get there. The second thing that came to mind was that the ability to educate people about their healthcare options and the ability to educate people about potentiality for healthcare disparities or inequities, I think is going to be the biggest driver to not just crossing the trust chasm, but breaking it down and building a bridge. Because what that does, it really switches the onus of healthcare from this is something that is being put on me. This is something that I have no control in participating in. And so therefore I will naturally be skeptical about what's being put in my body, what's being done to me, what's being told to me, if I am uninformed, if I have no agency in what those things are. And that's why I think knowledge, which is not technically technical, right, is a very key part here. If we can solve for that, if we can empower people to become more aware of what their healthcare options are, if we can empower them to feel, hey, you may not have insurance, but here are digital health tools that have low cost, that can be used with FSA or HSA funds, that can be used with sort of other health grants, et cetera. You still have options to care, even though you may fit in a demographic, even though you may feel like you don't. And so I think the trust thing is quite real. I am very convinced that the most effective and long-term solution is going to be through education. Now, I'm sure there's probably other ways to get there, but for me, I think the education piece is going to be key, because an empowered soul is just going to empower others. It's going to feel more agency, and it's not going to have to rely on someone else to feel trusted, but it's going to trust themselves.
I see another question coming in. I'm not sure the audience can unmute, but a question from Dr. Marianne Green. I'll just state it back. The trust question is so important. Major issues affecting trust is cost, lack of transparency. Can our tech help in these domains?
Absolutely. I mean, that is something that I'm solving with digital health review. The question can be, out of all there's about 350,000 mental health apps, right, on the App Store, and that's a count from early in 2021. So there could be more. How does one, as a consumer or a patient, or even a provider that wants to recommend these tools to their patient, understand and compare one tool from the next? We know through research, evidence-based, qualitative, quantitative, that there are key factors that people consider to help them trust which tools. They like recommendations from the providers. They like recommendations from their peers. They want to understand the cost or cost range of things, the insurability of it. They want to know if it's keeping their data safe, if it's HIPAA compliant or CE mark. They want to know if it's gone through some sort of FDA clearance or clinical validation. All those things are getting the consumer, patient, or provider a step closer to trust. And that is something that I'm trying to solve with digital health review. And so, yes, I do think technology can get there. I do think something as simple as posting on your page, how you're going through the data collection and why it's important to you as a company or as a product or service provider. That's important. I do think that technology and innovators who collaborate more and solve the interoperability problem that's sort of plaguing the healthcare industry as well will also be able to provide better experiences to patients, and that too can help with the trust issue there. And so I think it's a variety of ways. I'm approaching it in one way. There's things that we can do with technology that I think are probably more on the infrastructural piece that can help. So that's the interoperability, that's the transparency, data sharing, data ownership for patients, et cetera, that can help there.
Blair, there's one other question that came in as well. And again, I'll read it back. So Megan Murphy Bellcaster asked, when you say counterintuitive, do you mean counterintuitive relative to standard startup advice or counterintuitive relative to healthcare standard of care? Startups are already counterintuitive, but I wonder if innovating to close healthcare disparities adds layers of counterintuition.
I would say it's both. It's a both and. If we go back to the racial bias in the AI algorithm, that is a great example of counterintuitive to the healthcare system. To the healthcare system, there are going to be incentives that do not align with patient centricity or patient-centric care. A hospital system and a payer may be worried about cost. So they may build an algorithm to rank care, who receives care, based on who's going to require less cost. That is counterintuitive, and we should not be building in that way. In the startup world, sometimes, not all, there is an over-index for growth, and that may mean certain partnerships, that may mean certain go-to-market strategies, that may mean not measuring early on so that you can get to market faster. All those things are counterintuitive to patient-centric care. So I believe, to your question, it is a both and. And I believe what we should be doing is just being able to create, ideally, an evaluation rubric of digital health solutions and how they're hitting health equity measures. And if the scores are high, great, let's keep going. If they're not, how do we innovate on them to make them better? We don't necessarily have to kill them, we can make them better.
Blair, can I ask one question about that last point? I love what you're doing with digital health review. You mentioned like a scoring rubric. What type of individuals or organizations or institutions are or should be involved in helping to develop that rubric? It seems like that could be, that's such an important piece, because then there's like a standard or a process that people can go back to and follow. And I feel like it's especially so important now because, we want to get to something that is valuable and truthful, and but sometimes it's hard to know who's defining that truth. But by having at least a process outline may be very helpful.
Absolutely. Thinking about the folks that need to be involved, I would obviously first say the patient, right? So who's going to be the end user of that tool, patient or provider? One of the key things that we also need to solve for, I'm sure most of you guys have been in healthcare systems, you can probably relate to some of the dinosaur usability that are in these systems, in EMRs, and how horrible they are. We need to understand from patients or the end users if the tools and services that they're using are accommodating, if they're encouraging engagement or not, if they're solving for their not just physical needs, but their emotional safety and mental safety for continued use. I would also say that the digital health community should be pairing closely with the public health community. We are not going to know everything. We are technologists, but we should also partner with those that may have more of a global and public health understanding that we can lean on. Policy and regulators are going to be key. One thing that I feel is going to be necessary once we get a foothold on patient engagement, or to help get a foothold on patient engagement, as well as scale of the right digital health solutions, is embedding the use of them through policy and regulations. Right now, during COVID, there were interim policy regulations for the reimbursement of telehealth for providers. Not sure if a lot of folks here know, but towards the end of COVID, those regulations or those policies were set to expire. They have been momentarily put on hold, but we have not set up policy and regulations to help support the infrastructure that we need for digital health solutions. So that's going to be really important. If providers cannot get paid for telehealth services, we're going to lose quite a bit of healthcare access to those that may live in healthcare deserts, who may not live close to a healthcare center to get access to care. I also think that we need to work closely with researchers. This goes back to measure. You don't know what you don't know if you're not measuring it. As we're building, we need to, in real time and retrospectively, research the impact of what we're building on a local, public, and global level to ensure that we are on the right path. We also need researchers to help us identify new areas of targets to build for, and to understand at large what our data is doing. So if I had a round table of who should be at the table, I would say there should be patients, there should be a good cohort of public health folks, a good cohort of public policy and regulators, and a good cohort of researchers. And I think that group is a great place to start. And then we can innovate and innovate and innovate.
Well, I love that. I think if there's any way that we or others in the community can help, I think the work you're doing is so important. It really is brilliant. We have one more question. Time for one more question. David Zaretsky asked the question, and I'll read it back. Thank you for this great conversation. With regards to startups, early on, you may not have a complete data set to be fully equitable. Would you suggest that a product is not ready for launch unless it is completely equitable? Or is it sufficient to have a goal in mind? How might you define a threshold for a company may determine when is sufficient equitability is reached?
Absolutely. I don't actually think that you have to wait to launch. I think that will stall out innovation. I don't think that is true. I think what I hope will come across is that there is purpose and intent to get there, and that it's built into the fabric of the company. So if I am building a diabetes solution or a solution for a patient population that is affected by diabetes, as an example. If I am intentional, I am aware of that patient population. I understand who they are, I understand where they live, I understand their social determinants of health. I understand how I'm trying to approach them. And I am measuring at each of those categories if I am succeeding or not. If I am not, that does not mean I need to quit. That means I need to find a way to succeed. And so I would say to that, measure, measure, measure. I know I'm repeating myself, but I cannot tell you the impact and value of data is going to be on digital health equity. If we are measuring intentionally from the beginning, it doesn't matter where we start, it matters where we're going. If we can show market improvement from the baseline of care or the baseline state of things, that, in my mind, and to many others, is a win. And so we just need to get better at measuring so that we can show that market improvement. So we can show that potentially if a small portion of the population was getting access, that we're now increasing it, even if it's by 0.5 percentage point, 1 year to a full percentage point another year. That is impact, and that can scale.
Great. Blair, I just want to thank you so much. I mean, the insights you bringing your whole expertise, your whole experience forward has been just such a great thing to hear today. We've taxed, I think, your voice, it sounds like, a little bit, so I hope you have a chance to get a little bit of rest for the voice. Thank you so much. We applaud the work you do, and if there's, I hope us or others in the community that have heard you today, there's a way to amplify the message, we'll do so, and we hope we can also find ways to continue to support the work that you do.